Merry Christmas on Christmas Day. Happy Christmas Day from Forbidden Planet TV and myself, Andrew Sumner, and the one and only, the legendary Dave Gibbons. Happy Christmas, Dave. How are you doing?
I'm absolutely fine, Andrew. It's really nice to be talking to you again. I know we did this last year. I hope everybody out there's having a good Christmas. I hope you're having a good Christmas too.
Yeah,
and we're going to talk about Christmases past and present, aren't we?
Absolutely right. And I can see that you've once again returned to us with your Christmas jumper on. Excellent work, mate. So I think I'll don my Christmas gear. So let's see. First of all, festive scarf. This is my Liverpool FC scarf, mate. There we go. Right. There we go.
Does Everton not celebrate Christmas?
They've just got the wrong colours for it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Blue never looks good. Blue never looks good. And I'll be polite and keep it at that. Do you know what I mean? I guess their existence is good for the city. And I've got relatives who are Everton fans. Not me. Yeah. Right, here we go. There's the old Santa hat from last year, mate.
That's very good.
Oh, yeah, look at that, right? What?
It really is Christmas now. Once you get that hat on, that is Christmas as far as I'm concerned. It all starts there.
Jolly old Saint Nick. Jolly old Saint Nick, that's me.
Jolly old Saint Andrew.
Absolutely. You may remember that your parting shot to me last Christmas Day was go and enjoy your holiday grab bags, which is exactly what I did. And I've actually got them with me this year. We talked about these at length last year. There we go.
Look at that. I love Christmas on a comic cover.
Oh, me too. We talked about this a lot last year, and I think there's nothing finer. I mean, the existence of these are so hot wired into my memory. I mean, these are my original Treasury editions from when I originally bought them. What's great about both of them is that you've got your front image.
Yeah.
And then you've also got the same scene from behind.
Isn't that clever?
It's cool, right?
I used to really love those Treasury editions. They're such a good size. And I kind of figured it out that when you're grown up, those are the same kind of size to you that an ordinary comic was when you were 7 or 8. So it's...
Mate, that is such a good point. And there's the rarely seen rear scene from this one.
The only thing that would make those better would be a bit of snow on the logo.
I agree. You know what, mate? They totally missed the trick from our IPC Fleetway days. Yeah, they should absolutely. Yeah, they should have taken a lesson from Roy the Rovers and Tiger and Sparky and all those titles and put a bit of
proper comics.
I love a bit of snow on the logo.
Yeah.
Now, mate, you and I have been talking quite a bit recently, reminiscing about our mutual love for Christmas and comics at Christmas and Christmases past, but you're something we're going to talk about a bit later on is you're about to publish your wonderful graphic memoir / autobiography, Confabulation, which comes out in February of 2023. And anybody watching this on Christmas Day who wants to pre-order a copy of that can order it from the links attached to our conversation. But one of the key pieces of information that I really enjoyed in Confabulation, which you've been very kind to share with me, an advanced copy, which I appreciate. Thanks, Dave. Is I love the story about the Superman 1957 annual. So can you tell us a bit about that, mate?
Well, you know, I've been drawing for a long time. I've even been drawing professionally for kind of 50 years. But I came across, when I was preparing material for the Confabulation book, I looked through my old archives and my old drawers and my old envelopes full of God knows what. And I found what has to be the very first picture of Superman I ever drew. And this was in 1957, when I would have been 8 years old. And it's Superman flying above the city. And I've signed it very elaborately and I've dated it. And it's obviously Boxing Day of 1957, which means that I must have got a Superman annual on Christmas Day, 1957, the day before. And no sooner had I seen it than I set to work copying pictures of Superman from it. So the fact that I still have that, I think, is quite an amazing thing. I also did one of Batman as well, but I ran out of interest because he was standing there pulling his bat cape on, and I wanted to draw the bat cape, but it was far too complicated, so it just kind of goes off into weird abstract shapes, you know. But and in fact, I have to say with that one that the best drawn bit of it is my signature. I obviously spent longer doing the signature than I could be bothered to spend on the Batcave, you know, an early form of extreme egotism, you know.
That signature is actually very self-possessed, I think. And by the way, Dave, by the miracle of Forbidden Planet TV, while you've been talking about both of these things, the Superman 57 annual and your first Superman illustration, they've been magically beamed up on the screen while you've been talking about them.
Well, that's good to know. So people can see just what a wonderful draftsman I was, even at the age of 8. In fact, when I look at it, you know, it's not bad. I mean, it's clearly copied and without a lot of understanding, but it's not a bad effort. And I think we spoke before about how one Christmas I got a pantograph, which meant that I could actually blow everything up to many times the size of the original little drawing. So, you know, Superman and Christmas, and the Superman annual in particular, was a staple of my Christmas. I think that one must have been the first one I ever got, because I was looking online to try and ascertain exactly what cover it had. And I don't really recognize any of the earlier ones. So that was my first Superman Christmas annual. And I used to get one every Christmas after that for the next, I don't know, maybe 7, 8 years or so. And my mum and dad would always say, because I couldn't wait for Christmas to arrive, you can have one Christmas present on Christmas Eve and then you've got to go to bed. So of course I'd always choose the Superman annual, and I'd read it. My mum would go, right, you've had your present, off to bed. I go, Mum, I want to read this story, just let me read one story. So it was a way of expanding the time I could stay up on Christmas Eve as well. So yeah, it's got really kind of fond memories, the idea of Superman on Christmas Day.
And how wonderful that that, you know, we've talked in the past about, and I know you're proud of it, and I'm a big fan of it. Your World's Finest, Superman and Batman with Steve Rude. How great that, you know, you parlayed that love of Superman into actually having been involved yourself in creating so many what have become classic Superman tales. That's got to feel amazing.
Yeah, well, again, you know, when I got the opportunity to write that World's Finest book, I think it was my idea that it should be set at Christmas. I think mainly because I just wanted to draw Superman in the snow and the dark figure of Batman contrasted with the snow. And there's a scene in it. I won't spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but probably one of my favorite scenes I ever wrote, where Superman gives Batman a Christmas present, and it's very misjudged. I'll blow it. I'll tell you what it is. He gives Batman a VHS video, and Batman opens it and kind of goes, and we see it is the Mask of Zorro. And Superman says, I thought that might be the kind of thing you'd like. And Batman just goes, and he goes, anyway, it should bring back memories. And Batman goes, it already has. Because that, of course, was the movie that they were watching when his family got gunned down in Crime Alley. Yeah. So it was a really, I really loved it, because it was Superman desperately doing the right thing, but he'd done the worst possible thing he could. But Batman didn't make an issue of it. He just rolled with it, you know.
I think it's a beautiful scene. Something that I've always thought is one of the, I think, the great episodes of Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, is the World's Finest team up, which is a lovely like 3-part episode, which was ultimately collected, you know, in one. And but I have always felt when I've watched that a lot of the DNA of your World's Finest book is in that episode, in terms of the way the relationship is drawn. And I don't know if you've seen it recently. I mean, Dini and Tim are geniuses, as we know, Alan Burnett, but I think if you watch that episode again, you'll see a massive through line between what you did on yours and Steve's World Finest and that episode.
I had no idea about that. I certainly will seek it out. I mean, it sounds like the kind of thing I'd like anyway, even if it didn't have any involvement from me. But well, that's really nice if it's added something to the world of Superman and Batman.
Oh, mate, you'll really enjoy that episode. It's one of the high points of both series, but it's definitely, again, the narrative is completely different, but the through line in terms of how the characters are dealt with, it's just suffused with what you did in your World's Finest book. So,
right.
Yeah,
and of course,
you'd enjoy it.
I can't overlook for a moment the wonderful contribution that Steve Rude made to it as well. He absolutely brought it alive, and the subtlety of expression on Batman's face and the way Superman does it as well. Yeah. I mean, I've been really lucky in things I've written in the past that I've always had really good collaborators: Steve Rude, Garcia Lopez, Mike Mignola. You know, I mean, Lee Weeks, just incredible people. And I am really proud of that, World's Finest, because to me, you know, in those far off days when I was 7, 8 years old, the only team up in town was Superman and Batman. And even on that limited level, it was such a special thing to have like the big world of Superman and the big world of Batman overlap for a bit. And particularly because they were normally drawn by the good Batman artist, which was Dick Sprang, who was, you know, the best sort of stylist of the Batman character, I think. And so that to me was just amazing. And then, of course, you got, and I can still picture the ad for the first issue of the Justice League of America, which was, no, not just Superman and Batman, but the whole lot of them, the Green Lantern and Aquaman. It's just fantastic. So there's something about that crossover of worlds. And indeed, the World's Finest thing, the title of each issue was Worlds Apart, Worlds Collide. So there was that idea of worlds integrating that I was really intrigued with as well.
Yeah, mate, it's a beautiful piece of work, and I love the festivity of it, as you say. So anybody who's never read Dave and Steve's World's Finest, it's a great, and you're looking to spend some of your Christmas cash, you know, pre-order Confabulation and hunt out a copy of World's Finest, because you're not going to be disappointed.
Good recommendation.
There we go. Jolly old Saint Nick strikes again. You know, your story about that 1957 Superman annual sent me back through a kind of festive wormhole and made me think about what the first album at British, because of course in Britain, as we talked about last year, comics annuals, hardbound comics annuals are a massive part of our culture and continue to be so. And I was trying to think what my first annual was, and then in a kind of Proustian kind of shock of memory, I realised that what it was the 1967 Batman storybook annual, which I would have got for Christmas in December 1967, which was the year in which I doubled down and became a particularly massive Batman fan, because at the beginning of '64. When I was still 3 years old, that's when my dad took me to see the Batman '66 movie with Adam West.
Yeah.
At the Savoy Cinema in Heaton Moor, just outside of Manchester, and it's an indelible trip, you know. And by that Christmas, I've become totally obsessed with Batman. And that Batman storybook annual, it's really interesting. Have you ever seen it before, Dave?
I haven't really. That's a bit after my time for having Christmas annuals. Yeah. So, I mean, it was weird because there's like the gap where the ones you're talking about were, and then later on, by the time I become a professional artist, I was a contributor to the Superman annuals. I did the odd cover or the end paper or a puzzle page or something. But that area that you're talking about is just a little bit out of sync with my particular memories.
Yeah, no, I completely get it, and it's really what's really interesting about it, because I don't have it anymore, but because it just completely fell apart through massive amounts of rereading. But it's essentially like a classic, almost 1950s story based with illustrations annual. It's not a comic strip annual, right. And it's got what I now realize. There's really interesting stuff in there, like the layout of the Batcave and the blueprints for the Batmobile. But it's written with a very British sensibility as well. So when you read it these days, there's something off about, the way Batman himself is presented. It's like somebody who's watched the TV show and then gone, right, that's what Batman is, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, it makes absolute sense. I mean, the thing about my era of Christmas annuals, superhero Christmas annuals, well, they were just straight reprints from the American comics, but in black and white, which I always really liked the black and white. And I spent a lot of time studying the black and white artwork, which might have contributed to my development as an artist anyway. That looks like real comics to me, still something in black and white. And the color quite often is a bit a bit of a redundant, it can be a redundant overlay, not to put down any colorists, and God knows I've colored quite a few comics myself, but there's something about that classic black and white look. And of course, from the publisher's point of view, it was a no-brainer. They were straight reprints. There was no editorial input into it at all, I guess, other than making sure they had the right number of pages. And they would charge you whatever it was, 7 shillings and sixpence, and you get maybe 10 stories, as opposed to charging you sixpence and you get maybe 2 stories. So from their point of view, you know, it was a much more profitable thing to do. I'm not sure if I've worked the maths out on that properly, but basically what I'm trying to say is it was just it was a bigger, fatter comic for many, many times the price of the individual comics. And of course, if you'd gone in a newsagents in those days, they would have stacks of Christmas annuals. Every weekly comic had a Christmas annual. A lot of the TV things had a Christmas annual. And they were the gift that everybody used to get, even people who maybe didn't read comics every week, you know, throughout the year, would get a Christmas annual. I mean, nearly everybody I can think of would get a Christmas annual. And quite often I'd end up swapping them with them so that I could get my fix of that. So they were a staple part of childhood. And it's really good to see that despite all the vicissitudes of comic publishing, there is still a Beano annual and there's still a Dandy annual. And I think even to people who aren't interested in comics at all, it's still an iconic thing about Christmas. That and the Guinness Book of Records, that's the other thing you always used to get at Christmas. And I used to love that as well, you know, all the world records of eating hard-boiled eggs or something like that. So yeah, it's all enmeshed with Christmas.
It's so true. They're classically British Christmas items. I mean, the great company that produced the comics-based annuals for many years was a repackager called World Distributors, who are based in Manchester. And right. I think the next comic book related Christmas annual I got was the Marvel Comics annual from 1969. And that's right. Exactly the dynamic, say, really nice but unusual color cover, because I think it was, you know, painted by a British artist and then lots of comic strips inside. But then I think the next thing that I really remember, and I wanted to ask you if you had an opinion about this, is I don't know what the behind the scenes details of this were, but by 1973, at that point, in 72 or 73, Mighty World of Marvel UK has launched, and Mighty World of Marvel is a weekly that comes out every week, and Spider-Man Comics Weekly comes out every week. And so in 1973, you get the first proper Marvel Comics UK annual. But interestingly, both that and the 1974 edition are published by Fleetway. So I don't know what kind of arrangements were going on behind the scenes. I imagine it was because Fleetway had the infrastructure to make the annuals. And so probably Marvel UK hived them out. But my question is this, Dave. The 1973 Marvel annual has a very famous cover, which is a painted version of that classic Jack Kirby panel where the Hulk is picking up the mobile military gun.
Cannon.
The cannon, yes, indeed. And it's a really famous Jack Kirby panel that I know you're very familiar with, as am I, as a lot of old school comics fans are. But this Marvel annual cover is a painted version of that. It's very beautiful. It's very, very, very colourful, a very green Hulk. But I've got no idea who did that artwork.
No, I mean, these things used to be handed out in a completely random way, just whoever had some free time, I think. I mean, as far as the Mighty World of Marvel is concerned, I was actually in at the very beginning of the Mighty World of Marvel, because they would get, the way the operation worked, would they be sent high quality prints from the US that they would then have printed in England and distributed like a comic in England. But the only problem was that they all had the American spellings of words. So in other words, color without a U, honor without a U, and they had to be corrected to the English version. I think they were afraid of being, accused of selling American, the American culture to the British culture and misleading children as to how words were spelled. But anyway, I had the job from the very first issue of anglicizing the spelling, which, because you were having to drop a letter out, meant that you had to completely re-letter a line. You know, it wasn't as easy as the other way around. So every week I would get a bundle of these pages from Marvel UK, do my microsurgery with anglicising the lettering and sending it back in. And of course, it's like any art correction. If it's done properly, you can't see it. So I look at those early issues, and unless I'd known that it had been doctored, I would never have known it had been, you know.
Yeah.
So it was a question of art hiding itself. And when it came to the Christmas annuals, I imagine what might have happened there was, before Mighty World of Marvel, Fleetway actually published a lot of Marvel material. They had comics like Smash and POW, where they were American superheroes integrated into a more British sort of comic menu. And it may well be with those annuals, because they were prepared so much in advance, that for that overlap time, they were still published, or Fleetway still had the license to publish the annuals. That would be my only guess as to why that would happen. And then, of course, what happened was, they, with DC Comics in particular, they started to do much more of the editorial in England. I don't know why. I imagine to make it look more like a traditional British comics annual rather than just straight reprints of pages. They do things that had word searches in them, or mazes, or quizzes, or something like that. And they were published in this country by Egmont, and their chief editor was a woman called Vanessa Morgan, who's unfortunately no longer with us. But she was, you know, very involved in the British comics scene, very involved in the Society of Strip Illustration. And she commissioned early work from me, because the mid-70s was when I was kind of breaking into comics. Some covers and end papers by me, work by Brian Bolland, work by John Bolton, text by Alan Moore, Steve Moore. You know, again, it was one of those things where it was our generation floating around trying to pick up work, and all gravitating towards the places where work could be found. So that was really enjoyable. And even before I started drawing for like real DC Comics, it was like, yeah, I'm a comic artist drawing American superheroes. So it was a stepping stone into the real thing.
Oh, mate, that is such a lovely story. And, you know, I'm sure your explanation of why Fleetway produced those 73 and 74 Marvel annuals is absolutely correct. Would have been contractual advance. You'd think, having been a publisher for 35 years, I would have figured that out, but I hadn't until you told me. And you're absolutely right. That's undoubtedly the reason. I've got one more annual to mention to you, because it's a show that I imagine you would have been a big fan of. I was a big fan of when I was a little kid, and that was the original Man from U.N.C.L.E., starring Robert Vaughn and David McCallum, and Leo G. Carroll as the boss, Alexander Waverley. And the 1968 annual, which I still have, it is just indelibly stamped in my mind. And I think what's interesting about it is that it's got the text-based stuff and the text-based stories with illustrations about the men from U.N.C.L.E., Napoleon Solo and Ilya Kuryakin. But it's got a bunch of the gold. What I found out years later was the Gold Key comic strips. And what's interesting about them is they're all illustrated by the great Mike Sikowski. Yeah.
Oh, really?
And that artwork of Ilya Kuryakin and Napoleon Solo stuck in my mind for decades, you know. And I was like, you know, and then ultimately when he did his revamp of Wonder Woman during the swinging 60s, he's got such an indelible style that whenever I saw him after that, the first time I saw him was doing Man from U.N.C.L.E., whenever I saw him after that, it used to really jump out at me.
Yeah, well, he's an interesting artist, Mike Sikowski. He was one of those artists who, quite frankly, the first time I saw his work on Justice League of America, I was quite disappointed, because he had a hell of a job. Because, you know, compared to, say, drawing The Flash, where you only had to draw one costume character, he had to draw the entire Justice League of America. And the way it was written, you'd quite often get them all in one picture for pages and pages and pages of it. So he had a really hard job just to organize the information, let alone draw it beautifully. And I remember my cousin, who was a little bit older than me, he told me that he'd seen a copy of Justice League of America. He was lying through his teeth. And he said it was bigger, much bigger than a normal comic. It was the greatest comic he'd ever seen. And all the stories were drawn by the real artists, you know, the proper artists. Of course, when I eventually got hold of a copy, they weren't. The covers used to look really good because they'd be inked by Murphy Anderson. But the interiors, as penciled by Mike Sikowski and inked by Bernie Sachs, were kind of blocky. But then I realized later on that he actually came from the same kind of school as Alex Toth, that a lot of it was just about the flat design of the elements within it. And when I became a professional artist myself, and particularly when I had to draw things like the Legion of Superheroes, you realize to draw these characters in these costumes, it's a nightmare of hunting through reference and looking at different things and trying to get the costumes spot on. So, yeah, and I think he did have, particularly with the Wonder Woman, and I haven't seen the Man from U.N.C.L.E. things you're talking about, but he did have that kind of mod, in the American sense of the word, mod sensibility, that it looked very much of the 60s, and it had that sort of flower power, hallucinogenic kind of vibe to it, didn't it?
It absolutely did. And I guess my closing point about this is the other thing that's interesting is in the Gold Key Man from U.N.C.L.E. that he illustrated, there was a backup strip which was called Jet Dream and Her Stunt Girl Counter Spies. And
say that quickly.
Yeah, right on. And it's basically a team of like white clad female secret agents who are like essentially retired movie stunt women. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that backup strip appears several times in this Man from U.N.C.L.E. annual. Because I didn't know what on earth it was when I was reading it, but the images really stuck in my mind. But what I realize now, it's kind of like a complete dry run for his Wonder Woman that he did it with, because in reality those Gold Key comics were created in about 66 and his Wonder Woman revamp was in 68, and when you read it you can see all the DNA of what he was going to go on to do with that Wonder Woman revamp.
It's interesting while we're talking about that I mentioned Alex Toth. I did get a Christmas book one year that was the thing that turned me on to Alex Toth. He did the Dell Comics version of The Land Unknown, which was basically about these US Navy people finding themselves at the South Pole, where there was a kind of pocket of prehistoric times with a T-Rex and everything and a mad castaway. And I got that as a hardcover book. It was just the size of a comic book, 32 pages or whatever, but it was in hardcovers like a Christmas annual. And there was something about that, and I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. But he's one of those rare artists that I loved what he did when I was a kid, when I was very young. And now I'm much, much older, I can appreciate even more what he actually did. When I was a kid, it just looked like he was drawing something that had really happened. But then grown up and with my artistic sensibilities developed, I could see that he was doing something so skillful and so clever and so, again, something concealing just how well drawn it was, but something that had an absolute believability to it. So, that's probably my equivalent of you getting turned on to Mike Sikowski, was me getting turned on to Alex Toth.
Wonderful. Toth's such a great artist as well, mate. Such a lovely artist. And I think now is a good time to talk about your late-breaking Christmas present to the comics faithful, if you will, which is your autobiographical publication, Confabulation, which is going to be out in February.
Yes.
What can you tell everybody about that, Dave?
Well, what I can do is give you a sneak preview, because it's currently being printed, or has been printed, I believe, in China. So the book is probably in a container somewhere on the China seas at the moment. However, they did courier a copy to me and a copy to Tim Pilcher, who's been giving me a lot of editorial assistance on this. So here I can show you one of the only 2 copies of the actual book, and it is the actual book. I'll show you that it's not just blank paper. I don't know how well you can see this.
It's picking up very nicely at the moment, mate. It's look at that. Look at the size of it. It's massive.
It's, as I said, never mind the quality, feel the width, but it's absolutely, I think it's about 100,000 words, which is quite a lot of writing. Each page has got an illustration on it that comes from various stages in my career, stuff I did, the Superman thing that we spoke about when I was 7 or 8 years old, stuff I did much more recently, correspondence, photographs of me and my pals, Radio Times cover I did of Superman, all sorts of things going on here. And it's presented alphabetically, so you can dip in and dip out of it and read a little paragraph about whatever happens to interest you.
So it's not a chronological biography, autobiography.
No,
It's basically essentially by subject, right, mate?
Yeah, it's by subject, but in the back of it, and Tim Pilcher put a lot of work into this, we do have an index, so you can look yourself up in it, fellow professionals, and see whether you're enough of a friend that you get a mention in my book. Nothing personal if you don't. And then we have a bibliography, which puts everything on a timeline, which we exhaustively research.
Wonderful.
And it's got hopefully more or less everything I've ever done on it. Again, with a scattering of other pictures. Oh, look, that's a picture drawn by my son, Dan, who was a published comic book artist when he was only 8 years old. So he beat me there. And there's the check that he received for doing it, $25.
Brilliant.
The cheapskates. So that's a preview of the book. To be honest with you, we really wanted it out for Christmas because it is like the perfect Christmas annual.
Well, it's annual style, isn't it?
It is. But I'm afraid with, various things that have been going on in the real world, there have been delays in the production line. So, but it does exist, and it will be out at the end of February. And I'm looking forward to doing some signings. I think I'm going to be doing one at Forbidden Planet and various other places, maybe overseas as well. We'll have to see about that. And I hope you all enjoy it. I've had a really great time researching it and writing it and finding things that I didn't know I still had. So hope it gives you some pleasure as well.
And I'm here to tell everybody it's a beautiful piece of work. In addition to the fascinating tales that Dave's got to tell, many of which he's not shared publicly before, it's that the image is jam-packed full of images that haven't been seen anywhere else. That's what I think is revelatory about it. There's so much stuff in there that I've just never seen before.
No, I mean, obviously there are pictures from Watchmen and Superman and 2018, things like that I've done. But I've tried to go for the sort of offbeat stuff, that odd things that I've done for advertising agencies, or stuff that never saw print because it was for a dummy comic that never was published. And so I've really tried to, because I've already done a book about Watchmen called Watching the Watchmen, which has got a lot of behind the scenes stuff in it.
Published by Titan. Yeah.
Published by Titan. And I did another book with Tim Pilcher called How Comics Work, which again showed a lot of the comic book stuff. I've really tried to go for stuff that you probably won't have seen. And I think also showing stuff from when I was younger, or when I was breaking into the business and I wasn't quite as polished as I became later. I would hope that people who aspire to do comics can look at it and think, God, I could draw just as well as Dave Gibbons when I was 10 years old. So there's hope, you know.
I think what's interesting in that 10-year-old image, by the way, is you can see the DNA of your actual art style in there right from the beginning, which is, you know, I mean, it's in a very nascent form, but it's fascinating to look at because once you go, oh, that's Dave's first work, it's like you can see that you're in there.
Yeah, and I suppose because a lot of the early stuff was swiped, you know, I basically copied it. But what I would always do is copy, well, usually full pages. So it was always the storytelling that was interesting to me, not just drawing a pinup. I mean, there are lots of pinup style images in there because they've become quite iconic. But it was always that telling stories, always, you know, the idea of read this, or this happens and then that happens. That was the thing that I particularly liked. And of course, like a lot of us do, I created my own characters. And as is well known, one of them, Night Owl, which I drew when I was, 12 years old, that eventually made it through to the big screen and became one of the characters in Watchmen. So it's interesting to see the evolution of some of these ideas and where they eventually ended up.
Just wonderful. As I say, mate, I think it's a beautiful piece of work. I think everybody who picks it up is going to really enjoy it. And the perfect gift to fans of yours, even though it's wonderful stuff, and the perfect late-breaking Christmas gift, or the perfect destination for those Forbidden Planet Christmas vouchers that your family have bought you.
Yeah.
On I guess rounding out this year's Like Christmas theme, what dropped a few days ago is Dave's been a regular guest on my, both here at Forbidden Planet TV and on my Hard Degree podcast. And one of the things that myself and the hard degree players, if you will, of which Dave is one, and a bunch of other industry professionals like Michael Moorcock, like Evangeline Lilly, like Ollie Smith, Julie Stark are all involved with, is our annual charity performance of A Christmas Carol. And it dropped a few days ago. The links to that Hard Degree Christmas Carol 2022 are connected here to this piece. You'll find them below. But this year's charity that we're supporting is a brilliant charity run in both the UK and the US called ComicBooks for Kids. Willow Mullane, a great friend of mine, who's the marketing manager at Titan Comics, is one of the directors of that charity for the UK. Mark Weiss out in the States is the founder, and they do brilliant work getting comic books into the hands of kids who are in long-term healthcare, in long-term hospital care. It's a brilliant charity, and that's what Dave and I are supporting with this year's Hard Degree Christmas Carol. So, Dave, thanks again for being involved in it, mate.
Oh, sure. Well, until you alerted me to it, I didn't actually realise there was such a charity, but I can't imagine a better charity for it to go to, because we all agree that reading and comics is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And it's the thing I think you realise when things aren't so good, how entertainment can take you away from your present circumstance. And I think for kids who find themselves in that situation, to have some exciting reading material could make such a big difference to their experience. So it's a charity that I'm really, really happy to support.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, mate. In fact, a lot of my extreme comics fandom comes from a very lengthy hospital stay when I was 3 years old, in exactly that way. And in my case, I had my my kind of World War II veteran grandfather, Pops, bringing his comics in. But
Right.
for us and the comic books for kids crew to be getting those comic books out to people on both sides of the Atlantic, kids on both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah, that's great.
Something we're very happy to be involved with.
Yeah.
And you heard it here from the ghost of Christmas present himself, Dave Gibbons.
Thank you very much. Do I look ghostly? I think I look quite good, actually.
I think you look quite florid and healthy, mate. I mean, the perfect way to look on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
The links to comic books for kids and to a Hard Degree Christmas Carol, which has just gone live a few days ago, are below. And Dave, I can almost smell your Christmas dinner cooking from where I am.
I think those are the sprouts burning.
So,
but I'm sure there's a glass of mulled wine on the table by now. So I'm going to go over and sedate myself after this cross-examination that you've given me.
well, I've got a glorious confluence of mulled wine, and a couple of years ago, I perfected my eggnog recipe with my son. And this year, right out of the Christmas Carol playbook, I'm putting together some smoking bishop, which is essentially mulled wine, but you use port instead of red wine. So that's going to be an interesting adventure.
Send me the recipe for that. That sounds good.
I 100% will, mate. And thanks for joining me here on Christmas Day at Forbidden Planet TV. It is always such a pleasure any day of the year to hang out with you, Dave, but particularly on Christmas Day.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to echo those sentiments, Andrew. Thanks for having me along to the party, and wish everybody a happy Christmas.
Yeah, a very happy Christmas, everybody. Peace on earth and goodwill to all. Take care of yourself, Dave.
Cheers, Andrew. Thanks a lot. See you next year.
Right on.